Have you ever heard those stories that start out as simple legends and end up becoming your worst nightmares? Imagine being trapped in a school at night, where every dark hallway holds a secret and the voices you hear may not be yours imagination. This is the story of 5 students who came across something they could never explain, and not all of them managed to get out and tell it. If you like chilling mysteries, get ready, because what I'm about to reveal will leave you thinking twice, times before walking alone at night. Let's start this mysterious story, but first, quickly check if you are already subscribed to the channel. That way, you can be sure that you won't miss any of the most chilling stories that we have prepared, especially for you. Continuing, it was a cold and silent night. The streets were deserted, lit only by the pale light of streetlights, whose lamps flickered occasionally, as if resisting the impending darkness. At the end of one of these streets, forgotten by time, there was a school. It wasn't an ordinary school. Its old building, with tall windows and rusty railings, seemed to carry centuries of untold stories. The school's walls were made of bricks darkened by time, and the main facade displayed a giant clock that had stopped years ago, eternally showing 11:33 p.m. They said that this time was special for that place. Something about the silence of the night that made it different, unsettling. The school had gained fame over the years, but not for the reasons you would expect. It was known for being a place where things were not exactly as they seemed. Teachers and former students told stories about lights that turned on by themselves, children's laughter echoing through empty hallways, and shadows that moved even when no one was there. That's where the night shift took place. Created to accommodate working students who couldn't study during the day, the shift seemed like a good idea at first glance. After all, it was an opportunity for many to complete their studies. But those who attended those classes soon realized that something was wrong. The building looked different at night, like it was breathing. The hallways seemed to get longer, and the sound of footsteps echoed strangely, as if someone was always following you, even when you were alone. Despite this, the school continued to receive students. Some had no other choice. Others were skeptical and ignored the rumors. But what they all shared was the same feeling. As they passed through the main entrance after sunset, an icy chill ran up their spine, as if the school itself was warning them that they shouldn't be there. On that particular night, 5 young people were walking to their classes. Ina, Marcos, Julia, Rafael, and Clara had no idea that they were about to become part of a story much darker than any legend they had ever heard. The school seemed to be waiting for them. The wind blew hard, almost like a whisper, as they passed through the rusty gates. The moonlight illuminated the old trees in the courtyard, whose shadows danced on the school walls, creating shapes that looked like hands reaching for something. It was the beginning of a night they would never forget. And for some of them, it might be their last. The 5 young people arrived almost at the same time, each coming from a different corner of the city. Despite studying together for months, they weren't exactly friends. Their lives and personalities kept them apart, but something that night would bring them together in ways they never imagined. Anna was curious, the type who asked a lot of questions, even when no one wanted to answer. She was the one who loved investigating school rumors, always saying that a good story should never be wasted. Marcos was the skeptic of the group. I thought everything had a logical explanation, and made fun of the ghost stories that Anna insisted on telling. "It's all just superstition," he repeated as if trying to convince himself. Julia, on the other hand, was nervous, always looking over her shoulder as if waiting for something to jump out of the shadows. She hated the night shift, but she needed to be there. Raphael was different. He was the brave one, the one who seemed to fear nothing, but carried a weight in his eyes that no one understood. He was reserved, but his presence made others feel safer. And there was Clara, the most sensitive of all, always quiet but attentive to everything. She had something special about her. She seemed to understand what others couldn't. That night, his expression was more restless than usual, as if he already knew something was wrong. As they entered the building, their footsteps echoed through the hallways. The school, always cold at night, seemed even colder. They exchanged quick glances, but no one said anything, maybe because deep down, everyone felt the same thing. An invisible presence, waiting. They headed to their rooms, still unaware that that night would change their lives forever. During the break, the five of them gathered in the center hallway near an old soda machine that never worked. The environment seemed quieter than usual, and the conversation started with Anna, of course. "Have you ever heard of Professor Helena?" she asked with a sparkle in her eyes. Marcos sighed, already predicting another one of Anna's stories. "Here you come with this nonsense." "It's not nonsense," she insisted. "She taught here a long time ago, but one day she just disappeared. They say she was last seen in the science lab, long before it was sealed." Clara, who until then had been silent, murmured, "My grandmother studied here and heard about her. She said that sometimes you can still hear Helena's voice in the hallways." "Voices in the hallways? Do you really believe that?" Marcos scoffed, but Julia seemed to get even more nervous. "It is serious," Anna continued. "They say she was obsessed with a project, something about pushing the limits of science. No one knows exactly what happened, but people started hearing strange things at night, until one day she disappeared. And ever since then, whoever stays here too late ends up hearing things too." "Things like what?" Raphael asked, more out of curiosity than fear. "Crying, whispering. And there are people who swear they saw a woman in white wandering the corridors, but no one stays to find out." The silence that followed was interrupted by the sound of distant footsteps echoing through the empty hallways. Everyone looked at each other, and even Marcos, the skeptic, seemed to be uneasy. "It's probably the janitor," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. But Anna smiled softly, as if she knew something that the others didn't. "Or maybe it's Helena. Who knows? Maybe she's looking for something. Or someone." Julia looked at the clock nervously. There were still 2 hours left until the end of the shift. It was too long to be there. Shortly after returning to their rooms, something unexpected happened. The lights started to flicker. At first, no one paid much attention. Wiring problems were common at that old school, but this time the blink was followed by a strange sound, almost like a whisper coming from all directions. "Great, now there's no power too," Marcos murmured, trying to sound casual. But even he noticed that there was something different in that darkness. Suddenly everything was completely blacked out. There wasn't even a faint light from the streetlights outside, just total darkness. Julia gripped the edge of the table so hard that her knuckles turned white. Anna tried to use her cell phone to light up, but strangely, the battery had run out, even though it had been charged moments before. "That doesn't make sense," said Raphael, as he pressed the call button on his cell phone, without success. Clara, sitting in the corner, seemed frozen, her eyes fixed on the door, as if she was waiting for something to enter that way. Then the sound started. It was low at first, an indistinct whisper that seemed to come from everywhere. "Do you guys hear this?" Anna asked, her voice shaking for the first time. "It's just the wind," Marcos replied, although he himself didn't believe what he was saying. After a few minutes that seemed like an eternity, the lights came back on, blinking slowly until they stabilized. But something was wrong. The clocks on the walls, which had previously read almost 9 p.m., were now stuck at 11:33 p.m. This is a coincidence, right?" Julia asked, trying not to panic. "Maybe," Raphael said, but his tone wasn't certain. He looked into the hallway through the open door and saw something that made his stomach turn cold. Shadows. They seemed denser, as if they had a life of their own, slowly trembling even with no one around. "Close the door," Clara muttered softly, without taking her eyes off the hallway. Marcos laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. Close the door? From what? From the shadows? Clara finally looked up, serious and penetrating. It's not just shadows. The group looked at each other, and for a moment, no one knew what to do. The silence that came after felt heavier than before. It was as if the school was waiting. There, before we continue with the video, just check if you are already subscribed to the channel, because here we will bring a series of videos like this with incredible, terrifying stories for you. We continue. The class continued in uncomfortable silence. Nobody could concentrate. Even the teachers seemed more apathetic, as if they didn't notice their surroundings. When the next break arrived, the five decided to leave the room together, driven by a restlessness that none of them could explain. "Let's go for a walk," suggested Anna, looking at the others. "Something is wrong here. I want to understand what is happening." Understand? What if we just don't get involved? Julia suggested, but her voice was muffled by nervousness. Raphael shrugged. "We're not going to solve anything by standing here. Let's take a look, but without exaggerating." They walked through the empty hallways, feeling the air grow colder with each step. The shadows on the walls seemed deeper, as if they were following them discreetly. At the end of a hallway that was rarely used, something caught Clara's attention. "Have you guys seen this door before?" she asked, pointing to a narrow, rusty entrance. The door was partially covered in cobwebs and looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. Marcos approached and ran his hand over the worn sign. "Room 33, he read aloud. "Interesting," said Anna excitedly. "That room isn't on the school map. Why would a door be hidden like that?" "Maybe because no one should go in there," replied Julia, taking a step back. Anna ignored the comment and pushed the door, but it didn't give way. It was locked. It was then that everyone heard. On the other side of the door, there was a muffled sound, as if someone was knocking lightly, almost begging to leave. "Did you guys hear that?" Raphael asked, looking at the door as if it could answer. "It's just the wind," Marcos said, trying to remain calm, but the sweat on his forehead showed something else. "There's no wind here," Clara replied, her tone serious. She stepped forward, watching the door as if sensing something beyond the sound. "There's someone or something in there." Anna started knocking on the door. "If anyone is there, respond!" The sound stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was so heavy that none of them dared to move. Then one last loud knock echoed from the other side, as if something was letting him know it didn't want to be disturbed. "I think this is a sign for us to leave," Julia said, pulling Clara by the arm. "I agree," Raphael muttered, taking slow steps back. But Anna looked at the door one last time, with a determined expression. "Tomorrow I'll bring something to open this up. Something here doesn't make sense, and I'll figure it out." The group walked away, but as they walked down the hallway back to their rooms, an unsettling feeling remained. It seemed as if something was watching them from the shadows, something that was waiting patiently. In the next class, the environment seemed even stranger. The air was cold, heavy, as if the entire school was holding its breath. Clara, who was already restless, seemed particularly disturbed. She looked at the living room door frequently, as if expecting something to walk in at any moment. "Clara, is everything okay?" Anna whispered, trying to get his attention. Clara took a while to respond, as if she was having difficulty concentrating. Finally, he murmured, "I think someone is calling me." "Calling?" Anna asked, frowning. "Calling from where?" "I don't know," Clara replied, her voice weak. "It's like a whisper, coming from far away, but at the same time, close by." Anna exchanged a worried look with Raphael, who was sitting on the other side of the room. He seemed to have heard the conversation and gave a discreet signal that they would sort it out later. But Clara didn't wait. In the middle of class, she stood up abruptly without saying a word. The teacher barely noticed when she left the room, her footsteps echoing down the hall. "Clara, where are you going?" Anna called, but Clara had already disappeared through the door. This is a coincidence, right?" Julia asked, trying not to panic. "Maybe," Raphael said, but his tone wasn't certain. He looked into the hallway through the open door and saw something that made his stomach turn cold. Shadows. They seemed denser, as if they had a life of their own, slowly trembling even with no one around. "Close the door," Clara muttered softly, without taking her eyes off the hallway. Marcos laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. "Close the door? From what? From the shadows?" Clara finally looked up, serious and penetrating. "It's not just shadows." The group looked at each other, and for a moment no one knew what to do. The silence that came after felt heavier than before. It was as if the school was waiting. Before we continue with the video, just check if you are already subscribed to the channel, because here we will bring a series of videos like this with incredible, terrifying stories for you. We continue. The class continued in uncomfortable silence. Nobody could concentrate. Even the teachers seemed more apathetic, as if they didn't notice their surroundings. When the next break arrived, the five decided to leave the room together, driven by a restlessness that none of them could explain. "Let's go for a walk," suggested Anna, looking at the others. "Something is wrong here. I want to understand what is happening." "Understand? What if we just don't get involved?" Julia suggested, but her voice was muffled by nervousness. Raphael shrugged. "We're not going to solve anything by standing here. Let's take a look, but without exaggerating." They walked through the empty hallways, feeling the air grow colder with each step. The shadows on the walls seemed deeper, as if they were following them discreetly. At the end of a hallway that was rarely used, something caught Clara's attention. "Have you guys seen this door before?" she asked, pointing to a narrow, rusty entrance. The door was partially covered in cobwebs and looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. Marcos approached and ran his hand over the worn sign. "Room 33, he read aloud. "Interesting," said Anna excitedly. "That room isn't on the school map. Why would a door be hidden like that?" "Maybe because no one should go in there," replied Julia, taking a step back. Anna ignored the comment and pushed the door, but it didn't give way. It was locked. It was then that everyone heard. On the other side of the door, there was a muffled sound, as if someone was knocking lightly, almost begging to leave. "Did you guys hear that?" Raphael asked, looking at the door as if it could answer. "It's just the wind," Marcos said, trying to remain calm, but the sweat on his forehead showed something else. "There's no wind here," Clara replied, her tone serious. She stepped forward, watching the door as if sensing something beyond the sound. "There's someone or something in there." Anna started knocking on the door. "If anyone is there, respond!" The sound stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was so heavy that none of them dared to move. Then one last loud knock echoed from the other side, as if something was letting him know it didn't want to be disturbed. "I think this is a sign for us to leave," Julia said, pulling Clara by the arm. "I agree," Raphael muttered, taking slow steps back. But Anna looked at the door one last time, with a determined expression. "Tomorrow I'll bring something to open this up. Something here doesn't make sense, and I'll figure it out." The group walked away, but as they walked down the hallway back to their rooms, an unsettling feeling remained. It seemed as if something was watching them from the shadows, something that was waiting patiently. In the next class, the environment seemed even stranger. The air was cold, heavy, as if the entire school was holding its breath. Clara, who was already restless, seemed particularly disturbed. She looked at the living room door frequently, as if expecting something to walk in at any moment. "Clara, is everything okay?" Anna whispered, trying to get his attention. Clara took a while to respond, as if she was having difficulty concentrating. Finally, he murmured, "I think someone is calling me." "Calling?" Anna asked, frowning. "Calling from where?" I don't know, Clara replied, her voice weak. It's like a whisper coming from far away, but at the same time, close by. Anna exchanged a worried look with Raphael, who was sitting on the other side of the room. He seemed to have heard the conversation and gave a discreet signal that they would sort it out later. But Clara didn't wait. In the middle of class, she stood up abruptly without saying a word. The teacher barely noticed when she left the room, her footsteps echoing down the hall. "Clara, where are you going?" Anna called, but Clara had already disappeared through the door. "No, Clara could be in here," Anna insisted, but before they could think of another solution, a low, dragging sound came from the end of the hallway, as if something was being pulled on the floor. They turned at the same time, eyes fixed in the direction of the noise. A dark, indistinct figure seemed to move slowly in the gloom. It had no face, just an indefinite shape, like a shadow that had escaped its source. "Run!" Raphael shouted, pulling Anna by the hand. The four of them dashed down the hall, the heavy, dragging sound echoing behind them. When they finally reached the main entrance, the doors were closed and locked. "What?" "Those doors never lock," Marcos shouted, pulling hard on the doorknob. "It's as if they didn't want us to leave," muttered Anna, looking back, where the figure had disappeared. Silence returned, but the feeling of being watched remained. Raphael, still trying to remain calm, said, "If we can't leave, we need to find another way. But first, let's find out what's going on here. This isn't just a legend, it's real." Despite their fear, they knew they had no choice. Something at school was messing with them, and somehow Clara was at the center of it all. After a moment of silence to catch their breath, the group decided to return to the nearest classroom. They needed to think of a plan before something worse happened. They entered the old room 12, which was empty and had a strong, musty smell. The fluorescent light flickered slightly, which only added to the feeling of discomfort. "We need to organize our ideas," said Raphael, trying to maintain control. "What do we know so far?" "We know that Clara heard something, went to the forbidden corridor and disappeared," Anna replied quickly. "And that, whatever it is, it's playing with us." Julia sat in one of the chairs, clearly shaken. "What about the shadow? What was that? It can't be real." "Real or not, it's here. And it's not letting us leave," Marcos added, looking out the window, as if expecting to see an exit outside. Anna began to walk around the room, restless, until something caught her attention. "Guys, look at the board." Everyone turned around at the same time. The slate, which had previously been clean, now had words written in white chalk. They weren't there when they entered. "Come to the heart of the school. Only then will it be returned." "Returned? Clara?" Anna exclaimed. "But what does heart of the school mean?" Julia asked, trying not to panic. "Probably the place where it all started," Raphael replied, his expression grim. "The science laboratory, Professor Helena's office." Julia shook her head, stepping back. "No, I'm not going back there. You saw what happened. That thing is there. What if it's a trap? If we don't go, we'll never know what happened to Clara," Anna said, her voice determined. "I will, with or without you." Marcos sighed reluctantly. "If you're going, I'm going too. But this is crazy." Raphael nodded. "All together. We won't leave anyone behind." Julia hesitated, but when she saw the others getting ready, she stood up, although she was visibly shaking. "Okay, but if something goes wrong, I'll run. I'm just warning you." The group left the room in silence, their footsteps echoing through the empty hallways. Every sound, every shadow seemed more threatening now. Even the wind outside seemed to carry a whisper, as if the school was alive and watching their every move. As they approached the disabled corridor again, the laboratory door seemed more threatening than ever. This time, however, it was not locked. "Is it open?" Anna asked, without hiding her surprise. The sound of the door closing made everyone jump. Julia let out a muffled scream while Marcos ran to the door and tried to open it, but it was useless. "It's locked!" he exclaimed, pulling desperately on the handle. What is this?" muttered Anna, pointing to the center of the room. The white sheet on the table began to move on its own, as if something underneath was trying to get out. Raphael, despite his obvious fear, took a step forward. "Whatever it is, it's tied to Clara." "Are you crazy? Don't touch it!" Julia protested, retreating to the corner of the room. Raphael ignored the warning and pulled the sheet away with a quick movement. Underneath him was an old porcelain doll with glassy eyes and cracks on its face. Around her, symbols drawn with a dark material formed a perfect circle. "A doll?" Marcos asked, his voice full of disbelief. "Is that all?" But then the temperature in the room plummeted. The air became so cold that their breaths were visible. The dim light flickered wildly, and the shadow they had seen before began to form again, this time within the circle on the ground. It wasn't just a shadow. She seemed more solid now, the vague shape of a tall, thin woman, her arms too long to be human. His eyes were 2 points of an intense red glow. "You came," the figure said, its voice a whisper that seemed to echo directly into their minds. Anna took a step back, her heart racing. "What did you do to Clara?" The figure tilted its head, a slow, deliberate gesture. "She is with me, in the place where those who defy are trapped." "Why are you doing this?" Raphael asked, trying to maintain his courage. "Because she got in where she shouldn't have," the shadow replied, his voice cold. "You guys shouldn't be here either." The shadow extended a long, thin arm, pointing directly at Anna. Before she could react, an invisible force pushed her against the wall, causing her to fall hard onto the floor. "Let go of her!" shouted Marcos, advancing towards the figure. But as he approached, he was thrown back as if he had been hit by an invisible wall. "You have 2 choices," said the shadow, now more threatening. "Either they leave and forget what they saw, or they stay and become part of the school, like her." "What do you mean, part of the school?" Anna asked, getting up with difficulty. "Those who defy me become echoes," the shadow replied. "Presences that never leave, like me." Julia, trembling, finally spoke. "Are you Professor Helena?" The shadow laughed, but the sound was dry and lifeless. "I was. Now I am something more, and you shouldn't have awakened me. If you want us to go, give Clara back," Raphael demanded, trying to sound firm. The figure hesitated for a moment. "I'll give it back, but there will be a price." "What kind of price?" Anna asked, looking directly into the shadow's red eyes. "One soul for another," replied the shadow. "Choose who will take her place." The group exchanged desperate looks. The silence that followed was filled only by the sound of their panting breaths. "This is crazy," Marcos muttered. "We can't do this." "Then you will all stay here," said the shadow, his voice thick with finality. "Decide quickly. My time is short." And with that, the shadow began to dissipate, leaving only the echo of its cold laughter in the air. So have you ever heard of student horror stories? Leave a comment with what you know about it, and if you believe in these stories. Continuing. The group stood still, the air heavy with the threat left by the shadow. Anna tried to think quickly, but the idea of choosing someone to take Clara's place was unbearable. "We can't do this," Raphael said, breaking the silence. "We will not sacrifice anyone, so what do we do?" asked Julia, desperation evident in her voice. Anna looked around, her eyes stopping on the doll in the center of the circle. "Maybe that's the key. It's like she's linked to the shadow somehow." Marcos approached hesitantly. "Do you think we can destroy this?" "If it's our only chance, we have to try," Anna replied, determined. While Julia remained by the door, the others began to look for something they could use. Raphael found an old iron bar in a corner and gave it to Anna. Whatever it is, let's end this now, Anna said, holding the bar firmly. She raised the tool and, with all her strength, struck the doll. The sound of the impact echoed through the room, and the air seemed to vibrate around them. The ground shook and the circle crumbled into dust. The shadow instantly reappeared, now screaming in a high-pitched, deafening tone. But before she could do anything, she began to disappear, as if she were being sucked into the void. When silence returned, the temperature rose and the laboratory door opened on its own. On the floor, on the other side of the room, Clara was lying, disoriented but alive. "Clara!" Anna ran to her, helping her to get up. What happened?" Clara asked, her voice weak. "We got you out of there," Raphael said, with visible relief on his face. Without wasting any more time, the group left the room and the school, vowing never to return. But as they walked away, Anna looked back and saw, for a brief moment, the red eyes still watching through the laboratory window. As they left the school, the group felt the cool night air as a desperate relief. Clara was still confused, but seemed relieved to be away from that place. They walked together to a nearby square, where they finally stopped to catch their breath. "That was real, wasn't it?" asked Julia, breaking the silence. "Too real," Raphael replied, looking at his hands as if he still felt the weight of what they had faced. "We need to promise that no one else will know about this," Anna said. "If we tell, no one will believe it. And if someone tries to go back there out of curiosity, they might not be so lucky." Everyone agreed silently. Clara, still shaking, murmured, "Thank you for not giving up on me. You are our friend." "We would never leave you behind," said Marcos, trying to smile, but fear still hovered in his eyes. As they walked to their homes, each of them knew that something had changed forever. Teacher Helena's shadow may have been trapped at school, but the experience would mark them for the rest of their lives. And in the distance, the old school stood silent, as if waiting for its next victim. The days passed, and the group did their best to resume their routines. They avoided talking about what happened, but everyone had the feeling that something was still wrong. Clara, especially, seemed different. One night, Anna received a message on her cell phone. It was Clara's. "You guys need to come to school. I feel like something is left unfinished." Anna immediately called the others. "Clara wants to go back to school. She says something is wrong. Has she gone crazy? After everything we've been through?" Julia asked, horrified. "Maybe she's being manipulated again," Raphael suggested. "We need to stop her." Wasting no time, they ran to the school, fearing the worst. When they arrived, they found Clara standing at the entrance, staring at the door. "Clara, what are you doing here?" Anna asked, pulling her friend by the arm. I can't stay away," Clara replied, her eyes distant. "I feel like part of me is still in there." "You don't need to go back there. We've already resolved everything," Marcos insisted, trying to push her away. But before they could convince her, the school lights began to flicker, and the door, which should have been locked, opened on its own. "It's her," Clara whispered, her eyes now full of tears. "Professor Helena isn't finished. She wants all of us." The group stood still, feeling the same cold as before beginning to envelop the environment. And, as if an invisible force was calling them, they took a step towards the school, knowing that the nightmare was far from over. As they entered the school, the air felt heavy, almost impossible to breathe. The lights flickered frantically, and the hallways seemed narrower. "She's waiting for us," Clara said, as if in a trance. "What do you mean by that?" Anna asked, but Clara was already walking towards the laboratory corridor. "We shouldn't be here," murmured Julia hesitantly, but no one had the courage to back down. When they reached the laboratory, the door closed behind them again, and the shadow appeared. This time, its form was even more solid. "You're back," said the shadow with an almost satisfied tone. "Now they won't be able to escape." The shadow moved around them, slow and menacing. Clara took a step forward, as if drawn. "Clara, no!" Anna shouted, trying to hold her back, but an invisible force pushed her away. "I am the link," Clara said, her eyes fixed on the shadow. "She marked me when I came in here. I'll only free you if you stay." "We won't let that happen," Raphael shouted, moving forward, but was knocked down by an invisible push. The shadow laughed, its voice echoing. "It's too late. The pact is made." Before they could react, Clara disappeared in a flash of light, and the laboratory was plunged into silence. Well, we are already revealing more and more about this story, but before I continue, I realize that you still haven't liked this video. This is very important for YouTube to help promote our content. So leave your like on this video, which is free, okay? Let's move on. The group stood still, in shock. Clara had disappeared, and the shadow was no longer there. "The door is open," said Marcos, pointing to the exit of the laboratory. Without question, they ran out of the school without looking back. Once on the street, Anna fell to her knees crying. "She sacrificed herself for us." "But is it over?" Julia asked, looking at the school, which now seemed empty and harmless. Nobody responded. Everyone knew, deep down, that something was still watching them, waiting. As the group walked in silence down the street, a heavy feeling hung in the air. They had escaped, but at what cost? School was behind them, but Clara's memories and sacrifice were etched in their minds forever. But what if the story hadn't ended there? What if the shadow was still lurking, waiting for new victims? Now think, how many forgotten and abandoned places hide secrets like this? How many dark stories still lie buried, waiting for those brave or foolish enough to uncover them? If you liked this story and want to know more about disturbing mysteries, haunted places, and secrets that defy logic, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Here we have the most chilling stories, and there are many more lurking, waiting for you. Do you have the courage to continue exploring the unknown? The next mystery could be even darker. And who knows, maybe this time you'll be involved.